I'd like for Nicole Wallace et al. And others like her to acknowledge this GOP fascism didn't start with Trump. And when I say Nicole Wallace et al., I'm talking about a variety of people who were Republicans up until Trump emerged on the scene. And then were very alarmed and conscious of how contrary to their values and to the truth, this guy, well, one of the values is some kind of honesty. Now, I think that Nicole Wallace is really impressive. I her my estimation of her intelligence and articulateness and moral awareness has only deepened over time. I'm also a fan of another of the et al.'s, a fellow named Charlie Sykes, who, up until the dawn of the Trump era, was sort of part of that right-wing radio world, which, I didn't hear a whole lot about him before he broke with the right wing with Trump's arrival. But he was a guy in Wisconsin he was a friend of Paul Ryan's. He was on the radio talking from a conservative point of view and being an adjunct of the general Republican force of that era until Trump. And now he appears on MSNBC with some regularity. And I think he really does an excellent job. I mean, he doesn't pull punches. He sees things clearly. I'm tempted also to bring into the et al. A hero of our times, Liz Cheney. She's been inspiring. She was willing to give up power. I mean, in a party that was completely morally craven, almost completely. I mean, she wasn't the only one, Adam Kinzinger too. She was willing to give up her power and position out of integrity. And of course, she got punished for having integrity in that party by being kicked out of the party, kicked out of a Republican leadership. But before that happened, she served on the January 6th committee and did a great job. And she's still out there, and she's still talking about this guy, Donald Trump, that her oath of office required that she do everything she could to see that he be impeached and convicted, and then when that failed, to be fully exposed to the American people for being the criminal and fascist that he is. She was just really very good. And so these people are all heroes to me. And maybe it's inappropriate, and it's not a huge deal, but there's been a part of me that's been there for a while, piping up from within once in a while saying, "Hey, Nicole, I'd like to hear you admit that this thing that we're fighting now, that you're really such a good ally for." I mean, one of the things I've noticed is the conservatives are much, on the balance, are the best fighters. Liberals have a problem with it. So anyway, I'd like you to acknowledge that you spent a fair number of years aiding and abetting this thing in its earlier stages. As I said, in my last live stream, I came on and I talked about my history with discovering and fighting against the rising force of fascism from 1990 on. And I think, to me, it's quite clear that back when Nicole Wallace was a staffer for the W presidency was damaging us in very fascistic ways. I'll just name, there was the way that torture was used. I mean, it's not like Americans have never done anything violative of the treaty obligations and federal statutes having to do with torture. But it's been lower down people who got out of line with their power. With the W administration, for the first time, the torture was coming from the top. And in violation, as I say, of treaties and of statutes, it was not okay. It was an attack on the rule of law, and particularly an attack on the idea that there are limits to the way state power can be used, that our founders put in there about cruel and unusual punishments and due process and all the protections, because they knew of the history of dungeons and torture implements. And then the W presidency is responsible for waterboarding, is one of the things that was done. That was there's all this discussion about is that okay according to the no, it wasn't okay. It was a bogus disagreement. It was again the falsehood, trying to claim territory to prevent the truth from prevailing. No, it was torture that we were doing. And it was against the law, and they knew it was against the law. And again, this is just, and Nicole Wallace is in this presidency, just to bring it back to that subject. And I bet she was really good, and I think she's a lovely person. I can see the president would want to have her on his communication staff. I think that's what she was on. But meanwhile, the word has gone out to have George Tenet testify to the Senate somewhat falsely to manipulate us into the invasion of Iraq in the first place. And Colin Powell's gone out there and acting like he has more confidence that he's been told the truth than he does. At the very least, I don't know if I remember exactly what but he's out there at the United Nations selling stuff that turns out to be false. And the presidency knew that it was false, lying us into a war. And if you study history of fascism, you get to recognize some of this stuff. Now, does it matter that Nicole Wallace? I was going to say that presidency then puts out word to the Justice Department and the Office of Legal Counsel, I think it is, OLC, saying, I mean, I don't know what the exact assignment was, but I know what John Yoo created, that torture memo. Today we're discussing the question of presidential immunity. The torture memo is just a clever, what's it, three-card Monty trick to give presidential immunity. This group in justice will give advice. The people who are in power will take that advice. The people who they give orders to will execute that advice, which is criminal. But nobody can be prosecuted because one side just gave advice. The other one just took advice. And the third one was just following orders. It's a recipe for essentially presidential immunity. Any president, given that logic, any president can do anything he wants and not ever be prosecuted. Everybody's immune. Everybody's immune. That's the end of a constitutional democracy, really. When the most powerful person in the country is under no obligation to follow any laws, what do you got? There's a name for it. I mean, there are various names for it. Authoritarian dictatorship. I like to use the word fascism. It conjures up some stuff that I think is good to conjure up because it helps to illuminate what we're looking at and what the stakes are if you're fighting against it. So I don't know. I mean, she's doing a great job. Does it make a difference whether she realizes that when she was in her highest position in her professional life, maybe this is higher. I don't know how to compare them, but she's working right there with the president of the United States. Is she so? If she's going to be so offended by what it has become in the age of Trump, is there anything important about whether she recognizes that she served the growth of this thing? I don't know. At a spiritual level, I do think that it's important to recognize when you've made serious mistakes. I'm not sure what all you do with it. I mean, I admitted a few minutes ago that I misassessed what was going to happen with Donald Trump's being the nominee. I don't think I completed that thought, but I really felt that the good conservatives that I knew fairly well from living out here and doing talk radio with them for 10 years, I thought I knew that they wouldn't follow the minority faction that made him the nominee, 40%. And I thought that would destroy the Republican Party. But they all shipped off. Not all, almost all. They lost people like Charlie Sykes and Nicole Wallace. But I was wrong about that. And I look at that mistake frequently. And I think, I was talking to my son the other day, and he said, "Oh, Dad, you're such an optimist. We were talking about this upcoming election." And I'm saying to him, I think there's a possibility this will be a blowout because I don't think that more than a third of the people, if they understand what the real choice here is, would vote for fascism. And I believe that it is possible to get the great majority of the American people to see well enough what the choice is that you get that possibility of a blowout. He thinks it's going to be very close. And I got to recognize that I made a mistake, and I can see other examples in my, I don't know, almost 60 years of making predictions that I misjudged. And a lot of time it's got to do with being overly optimistic about my fellow Americans and what they will understand or what their values are or how they're going to act. I err in that direction, and I try to keep that in mind when I get my sense of where things might be going. And I want to avoid just continuing to make the same mistake in the same direction. Now, Nicole Wallace's and Charlie Sykes, and there are others. I mean, a lot of the people that are very good on MSNBC are people who stayed with the Republican Party pretty happily until Donald Trump took it over. The Bulwark crowd, I think, do an excellent job. Those are former Republicans. They have a publication. William Crystal used to be of the Weekly Standard. He comes out and he says some good things too. And there are a bunch of those guys that are basically would have been on the other side of the divide that concerned me back from the beginnings of Rush Limbaugh all the way through the W presidency, and who stayed with it even when the Republicans adopted it with Obama president, and across the board a policy of obstruction, making it their priority to make him fail. That shouldn't have been okay. That is not a defensible position for an opposition party to take. That's not what people elect them to do, just try to make the president fail. He was hired by the people to do an important job. You got to at least respect that. That's what the whole spirit of American democracy is. And they stuck with it when the Republicans were blocking Obama just for the sake of making him look bad, regardless of what the country needed. I knew a man who misjudged something at that level of light versus dark, in a sense. My mistake is, being naive or having some exalted, idealistic notion of my fellow countrymen. That's not a trivial mistake, but it's not the same as being happy to serve as fascism is taking over what you're serving. I knew a man who back in the 1930s, in the late 30s, bought into a notion of Joseph Stalin and his regime that didn't recognize the terrible darkness of the whole thing. The bugs, the Moscow trials, I don't know what I never asked this man who's a generation older than me, what all he knew about what Stalin had done and what a human monster he was. And if he didn't know, how was it he didn't know it? But then when Stalin and Hitler, with their foreign ministers, signed the non-aggression pact, the scales fell from his eyes at that point, and he broke with that. And as a young person talking to this guy about that episode in his life, it was clear that he was deeply humbled by how serious a mistake he had made in supporting this monstrous regime with its secret police and a reign of terror of sorts. And it was the effect on him was deep. And I don't know how much it was all for the better. I mean, he was very. There's a lack of confidence about taking any kind of bold stand after that. Maybe we're better off having Nicole Wallace not being humbled by recognizing that she missed what was rising around her that she was serving. I don't know. There's a part of me that wants her to recognize it. And then when I think, well, why is that something on my mind? And I don't have as good an answer to that question as I would like.